When I went over to China, or let me go back, I started building models as a kid, and the shark teeth on the P-40 really interested me. Later on in life, I started collecting stories about them and building more planes. And then when I was over in Cambodia, I met a farmer who helped Claire Chennault build the airfields for the ATG. The original name was the American Volunteer Group. That was their name when I went over. I'll explain that during the presentation. And he kind of renewed my interest. And I came home and I really started collecting. I have the largest collection known today. I've been to China twice, courtesy of the Chinese government, because I what the Flying Tigers did for China and helping defeat Japan, Chinese. And I give presentations now all over. Some in Massachusetts, some in New York, totally free. I'm proud to say I've done so in part of my collection, which is now on permanent display at the New England Air Museum, so you can go up there anytime and see it. The Flying Tigers, as I said, the original name was American Volunteer Group because they had to resign their commissions and become mercenaries for China. Claire Chennault, who was the originator, was way ahead of his time. He was like Billy Mitchell of World War I. He thought the pursuit, at that time, we call them P-40s, P-58, P-this, pursuit. They would call them F-fighters, F-16, F-18. So his theory was that the pursuit aircraft could have a tremendous impact on battling the Japanese. And he had a two-phase plan. One was to bring over 100 P-40s with 350 ground personnel pilots. The second phase was to fly in B-17s after they became established and bomb Japan at their homeland. The second phase, a good friend of mine, he's an attorney, aviation attorney down in Atlanta, Georgia. He wrote the book Preemptive Strike. That was phase 2. And what it was that they would bring B-17s over and bomb homeland Japan. The day Pearl Harbor happened, they were ferrying in B-17s to go over to Chennault, and World War II started thus. Phase 2 never happened. So they went to the European theater. So that'll start my presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, I'll answer questions. Is she allowed? You have to leave early. Don't worry. You can do that. And you'll find it interesting. On the back table, too, I put some books and I put some photographs that you can look at later. One more thing before I start. The P-40 aircraft, Curtiss P-40, very difficult aircraft to fly. And I heard somebody say he flew a P-40. It was you. Very difficult aircraft to fly. Chennault did get the 100 pilots. He wanted 100 pilots and 250 ground personnel, armors, mechanics, doctors, dentists, etc. He wound up with 317 originals. There's only 3 alive today. During their training, only 3 pilots flew the P-40. Most of them flew other aircraft transports and other fighter aircraft. The original Warhawk, P-40 Warhawk, had 230 calibers in each wing and 250 synchronized to shoot between the propellers. Later on, the E model came, and it had 350 calibers in each wing. Tremendous firepower. That's a 50 caliber shell. That's a 30 caliber shell. Every 5th round was red tip, was tracer. Every 5th round was black tip, armor piercing. So the tracers naturally showed where they went. Okay.
What was the engine in that?
The original was the Allison engine,
Okay.
about 1,000 horsepower. It could do about 370, 80 miles an hour.
Liquid cooled, apparently.
Liquid cooled, air cooled.
It was air cooled.
Yeah, air cooled. Later on, they upgraded to another version of the Allison engine. Very, very good engine at the time. That particular aircraft was the most advanced in that theater of war at the time. So the original 100 of them were destined to France. France got overrun by Germany. Then they were going to the British. Roosevelt promised Churchill, if you give us the P-40s, we'll give you the later version, the E with 350 calibers. pilot can't see in front of him,
Right.
all right? Not until he reaches level flight.
Yeah.
So that's part of the
The
presentation.
P-51s was saying, well, that's why they actually funded it.
Right. P-51, best fighter aircraft of World War II. From the design till the day it flew, 6 months. Because that's how bad they needed a escort aircraft, escort the B-17s over to Germany and the other countries. Here it is, the Curtiss P-40, built in Buffalo, New York. They built about 14,000 of them at a cost of about $55,000. Whenever I give presentations, and I give presentations to some high schools, and I learn through giving them to high schools, the kids have to have some knowledge of aviation, so I only give presentations to high schools if they have avionics classes. And I asked the kids when I first started, have they ever heard of the P-40, Flying Tigers and the P-40, especially the P-40? And they go, oh yeah. Well, let me go back. That was the initial design, the emblem of the Flying Tiger in the blue V for victory. That was personally designed to them by Walt Disney Studios, who during World War II created a lot of the nose art that was on front of bombers. And then Disney Studio, as I said, did a lot of that. So again, when I asked the students if they ever heard of the Flying Tigers, they say, yeah, John Wayne was a Flying Tiger. No, he wasn't. But John Wayne was a great friend from their early 30s to right up until he passed away with Tex Hill, who was probably one of the most famous Flying Tigers. And after the war, they joined together to help film and make the first King Kong movie. In the late 1930s, Japan was bombing China, advancing with no one stopping them. China really did not have any air force. The advancement into China, and they advanced into China mainly for the natural resources because Japan had no natural resources. They had an antiquated biplanes, which was originally run by the Italians. When Germany entered the war, Italy aligned with them, the Italians left, and Russians came in still with the antiquated biplanes. Claire Chennault at the time was out of the Army Air Corps. Those are his two wingmen at the time, Williamson and McDonnell. They went over to China as advisors to Madame Chang, who was the real power behind the Chinese Air Force, and General Osimo. At the time, they were flying county fairs at the time, similar to what the Blue Angels and Thunderbirds do with today. They were flying formation flying. They would tie ropes to the wingtips, 3, 4, 5 feet apart, and do all that. Williamson and McDonnell sent word to Chennault if he wanted to come over to China for 6 months and be an advisor to the Chinese Air Force. And he and Madame Chang there hit it off because Madame Chang was educated in Macon, Georgia, and she spoke with a southern drawl. And Chennault was from Louisiana, so they hit it off from day one. His 6 months lasted until the end of the war in 1945. William Pauling was the Curtiss-Wright representative. What they did is, Chennault's plan, none of the higher military liked it because they felt it was a threat to the military expansion. And the biggest opponent was Hap Arnold. But Chennault had two friends, and they were President Roosevelt and Churchill, and that's all that mattered. So they set up dummy offices for the Camco Company, Central Aircraft Manufacturing Corporation. They were housed in one room office in Rockefeller Center, just with a desk and a chair. No one ever manned it. And William Pauly sent his representatives to the different military bases to get these 350 people that Chenault needed. And basically, really, they had to resign their commissions for 1 year. They signed a 1-year contract for pilots, got $600, squadron leaders and flight leaders got $700 and $750, 3 times what they were making at in the regular Army, Air Corps, the Navy, or the Marines. Ground personnel usually average between $300 and $350, so it was big money at the time. And also what the General Chiang Kai-shek did, for every Japanese aircraft they shot down, he gave them a $500 bonus, and they paid a lot of those out. Their mission to sail over to Rangoon was supposed to be top secret. There's the ships sailing out of San Francisco. They sailed on Dutch freighters, hush hush, and made 2 sailings. The day they sailed, one of the many different kind of Tokyo Roses came on the radio and gave out every detail of their exploits, what they were going, where they were going, what they were going to do. So thus, Roosevelt gave them a naval escort all the way over to Rangoon, Burma. Yeah, they're having a little tea before they go. The 100 P-40s were put on freighters in New York Harbor. One of them fell overboard, so they went over with 99. They went over 2 crates. One had the fuselage, the other had the wing and tail assemblies. When they got over to low-wing China, they had to assemble the aircraft. They had to put on that 12-point Chinese star you see on the right side and bottom. Put numbers on the aircraft. Some of them they had to put engines, some of them they had to put the machine guns, etc. While they were putting together, assembling the aircraft, the fields had to be built in Burma and China, and here's the fields. All the fields were handmade just like this. In my trips to China, I went over to some of the fields are still there. They're not used, but they are still there. So they basically, the Chinese people, Burmese people had to crush large rocks into small rocks. And then they would bring out these gigantic stone rollers. That's what these Chinese people are doing. They're pulling these stone rollers to level the field and crush and push the stones down. Every time it rained, they had to bring them out again and level the fields again. And at the same time, they had to plant their staple crop, which was rice. Today it's corn. On my trips, one of my trips after we went down to the outlying towns and everything, fields on roofs, everything hanging. I saw yellow, and I was wondering what it was, and I asked my translator. I said, "What is that?" And she said, "It's corn. That's basically our staple crop now, in addition to rice." So I said, "Well, don't the birds eat it?" And she says, "No, there are no birds in China." And this was, my first trip was 1996, and I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "Well, many decades ago, because the Chinese people are so poor, the Chinese government made everybody destroy the birds because they were eating all the crops." And I'll tell you another part of the presentation, but really, it's very strange going to the countryside and not hearing or seeing any birds. It may be different today. And while they were building fields, they had to learn the different methods of what they were going to do, aerial combat, etc. And Chenault gave them 60 hours of classroom training and 70 hours of actual flight training. He taught them formation flying. He taught that the pilot always protects the squadron leader. They fly in 2-man formations. And the main tactic was to climb high, preferably between 12 and 15,000 feet, and dive on the enemy with the sun at the back, and keep diving and pick up speed and come back up and do the same. The P-40 was a very heavy aircraft that could outrun a Jap Zero, and he also taught them never engage in a dogfight with the Japanese Zero, because being so light, it could turn quickly and get on the tail of the P-40 and shoot it down. And also the Japanese were very regimented. In their first battle, on December 20th, 1941, they fought against 10 Japanese Sally bombers, and they went up to the prescribed height, came down and started shooting them. The Japanese never broke formation, very regimented. So they shot down 9 of those 10 Sally bombers. Here are the Japanese aircraft. Now, the Japanese aircraft naturally had Japanese names, so the Americans gave them male nicknames: Jake, Zero, Jake, Tojo, Fred, etc. All the fighter aircraft had male names. The bombers had female names: Sally, Nell, Jill, etc. So make it very easy to communicate with one another. P-40 cockpit. It is a kind of simple cockpit. This one is up at the New England Air Museum. For those the pilots who did not fly a P-40, this visual aid that they used in training, the pilot would sit in front of this mock-up of a cockpit. This is part of my collection also. And all the tabs you see in the middle on the bottom are numbered, and they also have spelled out all the different names of the instruments, controls, handles, etc. So if an instrument was marked number 35 on the pictures on the left, center, and right, they would pull down a tab to see if that was correct. That was part of their classroom training. Training on the P-40s. All the training was done in Burma. 1/3 of the 99 aircraft that went over there were destroyed in training because of the difficulty in flying it. Very heavy, as I said. You see those two aircraft? When they're on the ground, they're supposed to zigzag left and right so they can see what's ahead of them on the runway. Well, these two guys zigzagged at the wrong time. That's what I meant by they can't see out of the cockpit. So they got, and then all the wrecks and the damaged aircraft actually became their parts bank. During their 1-year contract, they never received any spare parts, with the exception of gasoline and ammunition, some tires. We had Tex Hill and another AVG pilot at the museum for a weekend a few years ago, and Tex said that when they ran out of, the tires wore down, the Chinese people would take rope, hemp, and glue it around the rims of the tires, and that was good for 2 or 3 landings and takeoffs. Then they got smart and they put on the wing sitters you see there, which guided them on the ground. And then they finally got their act together. They had 3 squadrons. Let me get this first. The shark teeth on the P-40. Actually, this is from the front cover of an Australian Air Force magazine, which I also have. One of the AVG pilots saw this, went up to Chenault and asked him if he could put this on his P-40. And Chenault said no, we'll put it on all the P-40s. So that's how the shark teeth became on the P-40s. And Chenault did it for a reason too, because of the superstition of the shark with the Japanese, in addition to looking very ferocious. There were 3 squadrons, which had about 20 P-40s in each. The first squadron was the 1st Pursuit Adam and Eve Squadron. The second was the Panda Bear, in tribute to the Chinese people. And the third was Hell's Angels, in tribute, well, it wasn't a tribute, but it was named after 1930 Jean Harlow movie. And there's other variations of this I can't show you either. Anyway, so those were the 3 squadrons. And they were based in China and in India, or Burma. The main Japanese base was in Hanoi. Here you see the American pilots on the left with the P-40s and the Chinese pilots on the right with the old biplanes. None of them flew the P-40s, the Chinese pilots, but they did do aerial reconnaissance, because actually there were no real aerial maps at the time. So the Chinese pilots would go up and they would hand draw maps, come back and run them off on the old mimeograph machine. That's what they used for aerial maps at the time. With the 317 came 6 Asian Americans, 5 there, 1 in the cockpit. Excuse me, the last one just died a few years ago, Henry Lee. He was from Taiwan, Formosa, not the Henry Lee from Connecticut. So there were 6 Asian Americans that went over there with them. Chenault was instrumental in planning every mission. Tex Hill said the first time he met him, he was a very dynamic guy, deep black eyes, somebody who instilled confidence in you, somebody you really trusted and you wanted to be part of. So he was greatly respected. Their main objective was to protect the Burma Road, which started in Rangoon all the way down on the bottom left, over 740 miles of twisting, turning, serpentine road that went all the way up to Kunming, China, where the ABG was headquartered. It was the only supply route at the time. These Himalaya mountains, or the CBI, there were no routes flying over that. At that time, it was too early in the war, so that was their only supply routes. That's what it looked like. Turning, twisting roads. Part of that is still there today. And you can see if you look on most of it, there's no guardrails or anything. So you could be looking down a half, 3/4 mile right into a ravine. And every truck that rides that has water-cooled brakes because of the steepness of it. You can go up 3,000 feet, come down 4,000 feet, go up 2,000, come down 6,000. So they have water-cooled brakes. One side of the highway is always wet. If the truck went off, all they did was salvage what they could and keep that convoys going and get the supplies to Kunming and or Rangoon. They stayed, these are their barracks. According to where the base was, depended on what they looked like. This is in Rangoon. No maid service in Rangoon. This is where they slept at night. And if you look on top, you see the mosquito netting and the rafters going in the middle. And Tex told us it wasn't for the mosquitoes, it was for the rats, because when they went to sleep at night, rats would run back and forth and fall down. So that's what the mosquito netting was for. He said that when you went out to get your chow, you always took 2 plates with you. Once you got your chow, you put it on top, the other plate on top of it, so the birds and everything else would fly into it. This is an alert shack. An alert shack is when they were on duty and they were waiting to hear word that the Japanese were coming. And this is the alert tent in Rangoon. This is another alert shack in Chongqing. You see the different they have different uniforms. They basically went over there with whatever they wore on their back from whatever branch of service they were in. They had a lot of theater-made uniforms and clothing. The British gave them a lot. This is Tex Hill on the left and his armorer, Jim Bussell there. And the telephone in the middle is to notify them. It rings when they hear word that the Japanese are coming. The fella in the upper left-hand corner, Ed Lebo, and I'll talk more about him later. The day of this mission or shortly thereafter, he was one of those pilots who went up and he did engage in a dogfight with the Japanese. He was shot down and killed. Actually, he bailed out and they machine gunned him to death on the way down. This was his best friend, Matt Coopendale, 19 years old, pilot. He was so ticked off that he did engage Japanese in a dogfight, shot down 3 of them, had part of his pinky shut off, head wound. Chennault grounded him for 2 weeks so he would heal. He gave such an argument to Chennault about why you grounded me, etc. Chennault said, just go back to work, don't bother me. How did they know when the Japanese were coming? There were no radar at the time. So Chennault developed these, what they call the Jing Bao, or these are Jing Bao balls. They're paper mache, you see them now, Chinese, Japanese restaurants, etc. Anyway, there's 3 of these paper mache balls. What Chennault did, he set up radio stations all around the Japanese bases, either with Chinese troops or with Burmese or Chinese people. And when the Japanese took off, the radio would call into Central Command, which was in Kunming, who notified all the ABG bases that the Japanese had just taken off and they're heading somewhere. That was the first Jingdao ball. When the second Jingdao ball went up, it usually meant that the Japanese were heading in a certain direction and passed over another radio station. So they would call back into Central Command again, and then the call would go to those particular AVG bases in the area. Well, the Japanese had a tendency to change direction. So, and usually when the third Jing Bao ball went up, they were 15 to 20 minutes out. And so that's when the pilots would go to their airplanes. Here they are still. Okay. And the Japanese, the AVG pilots would run to their P-40s. They have 40-pound parachutes on their back. There they are taking off. Now you see all the stones and rocks all over the place because the Japanese were still bombing at the time. And if they came over and bombed the airfields, the Chinese and Burmese people would come right out and fill the craters with the rocks. Once the AVG started flying, all the bombing in China stopped around wherever the AVG bases were. The British, the AVG shared one base with the British at Tungnu, Burma, which was the only asphalt base. So they leased it from the British. The British flew the Brewster Buffalo. This is it, considered one of the worst fighting aircrafts of World War II. The British commandant told his pilots if they ever turned away from a dogfight, like Chagall told his pilots to, if they ever turned away from a dogfight, they would be considered a court-martial offense. Thus, many of them got shot down because of that command. Then they are taken off. This is low-wing China. That field is still there. It was there many times. This is in a most remote area part of China, this low-wing air base. And you know what's there today? The most modern, advanced golf course I've ever seen. And who comes to it? Japanese. This is directed by Japanese on one of the hangars. Now this is one of the AVG guys with what they call a split trench. They were outlined in different bases. Texel said it had no effect. They never shot down a Japanese aircraft, but what it did have, it had an effect on the Chinese people that now Japanese were, if they were flying over, the Americans were there and they were firing on them. That great effect on that, positive effect. This is R.T. Smith, one of the more colorful pilots. He probably took more pictures by himself than any of the other guys. He's sitting in front, he's in a cockpit, and that rectangular thing is their sight, their, what do you call it? Their gun sight, I'm sorry. Optical gun sight, it's lit. He said it was so unreliable because the vibrations of the aircraft, he says, and even climbing into the cockpit and holding on to the top, they would throw it off. So what they devised, you see in the bottom picture, there's a little ring and post gun sight. They devised that ring and post gun sight. And that's the ring with the bullseye, and then the post is further out. And they used that as their gun sight. What they did, they took the P-40, they put the tail on a flatbed truck to simulate level flying, and then they would use the traces. This is night bore sighting. They would bore sight the machine gun so that they basically came to an optical illusion, like if you look down the railroad tracks, you think they're coming together. Anyway, they would zero in, and those 6 machine guns would come to a point about 400 to 500 yards out in front of them in a pattern. So that was a good distance to shoot at enemy aircraft in case there was parts of it flying off the aircraft, they could turn without being hit. So that's how they bore sighted the machine guns, and they used that 300 to 400 to 500 yard distance to tell the pilots when to fire. Here's a direct hit from a gun camera on the wing. And in the upper left-hand corner, you see a Japanese aircraft going to the ground after being hit. And now there was a Chinese reporter on the ground, and he wrote that the American volunteer group fought ferociously like flying tigers. And that's how they got their name, Flying Tigers. That's the Sally bomber, the main bomber in that field of war at the time. One of the ground crew wait for his pilot to come back. just texted all the boys coming back. So a successful mission. You see the 12-point star on the pilot on the left-hand side. Some of them wore it outside of their flight suits, on the back of their jackets, inside their jackets. Now this particular pilot came late. As I said, they only had a one-year contract from July 1st, 1941 to July 1st, 1942. He came late. He and Chenault never hit it off. None of the pilots were supposed to do this low-level pass. If you look at the bottom, those are all pilots or ground personnel that are hitting the deck, because this guy constantly did it. He also liked to drink, and when he drank, he liked to fight his own people. So he was billeted off of base with a British family. And he finally got a dishonorable discharge from Chenault and went home. This is him in the middle. Pappy Boynton, Black Sheep Squadron Medal of Honor winner, South Pacific. Came home at a ripe old age of 26. Couldn't get in the Navy, couldn't get in the Army Air Corps, couldn't get in finally the Marines took him. Marines take anybody. No, I'm only kidding. Don't get upset. But he got in, came in a Medal of Honor winner in South Pacific, shot down 24 or 26 Japanese aircraft, and wound up in a POW camp too. Big price on his head, big price on all the AVG's head. 3 of them did wind up in a POW camp until the end of the war, and really nothing happened to him. So this was Pappy Boynton. Met him many, many years ago, and naturally you get older, you get a little more responsible, and you regretted a lot of things he did. This is Ole Olson and Company Exterminators, and a sense of humor, his squadron. And here you see a Chinese soldier pointing to a blood chit on the back of the jacket. And what a blood chit is, this is a Chinese flag. The 12-point star, which represents the sun, the blue background, which naturally is sky, and the red. There's so much red in it. I never knew what the red meant. I was working on my collection at the museum one day a couple of years ago, and this older Chinese couple came in, and they asked me if I knew the background of the Chinese flag, and I said no. And they explained that. They said the red is for all the millions and millions of Chinese people who were killed over the different dynasties. That's what the red represents, their blood. In the middle, the other red rectangular is a chop. Now, when we sign something, we call it a signature. They sign something, they call it a chop. That's the chop of Chiang Kai-shek. The Chinese writing is for to tell the Chinese people in case these pilots crash land or bail out, in essence, protect them from the Japanese, their work for the Chinese or the friends of the Chinese government, and you will be rewarded if you hide them. So that's what they stand for. It's only a 9-inch piece of silk, and I have a real one I'll show you after the presentation. This is a tail section of a Japanese bomber shot down. The gull-like insignia is right in the middle, tells them what squadron it came from. This particular one is Hanoi. It was based in Hanoi. There it is on the ground. Now the bottom writing, what it says is a Japanese bomber shot down by AVG, and it's 14-cylinder engine designed in the United States of America. The Japanese the atrocities they committed, and I don't think I have to tell you, were unbelievable. They would shoot anything, they machine gun an ambulance. When I was in China, they took us to a museum. The first trip to China was like a presidential motorcade. We left Kunming, which is a big city, and there were Chinese troops at every intersection, every light, to let us through. It was I don't know, 50th anniversary, something like that. So that was my first trip. And then after we left Kunming, we drove the Burma Road, the new Burma Road, and we could travel 30, 40, 50 minutes without seeing a single village, a single person. The only people we saw were the old Chinese people sweeping the Burma Road with straw brooms. Every time we hit a new province or kind of a bigger, larger town, we had to stop and meet the dignitaries, etc. Then they took us to this one museum that showed nothing but the atrocities the Japanese committed. It was unbelievable. I don't know if you ever heard of the book, The Rape of Nanking, where the Chinese basically, 500,000 to 600,000 of them were killed in a matter of 3 to 4 months by the Japanese. But the woman who wrote that book too, parents were killed. It had such an impact on her after she wrote the book that she committed suicide. Here they are with one of the Japanese crew members that they captured when they crashed after being shot down. And Tex Hill told us that all the crew members that they captured, they were supposed to, interrogate them, take them to headquarters to be interrogated. None of them ever made it. They would hide them from the Chinese, and because of the atrocities committed upon the Chinese people, the Chinese would find them or come and get them, and usually behead them. So he said not one of them ever made it to headquarters. Their other mission was to bomb supply trains and blow up bridges as a direct hit by a 500-pound bomb. Their main armament were under the wing there were 35-pound bombs, 100-pound bombs, and 500-pound bombs. And that's the E model. You can see the 350 calibers in the wing on the upper left. The bombs, that's a 100-pound bomb. The bomb racks were improvised by the ground crews. Nothing came with the P-40, so they just pull a cable and the bomb would drop. There's different types of them. Of the pilots and ground crews that were killed over there, 12 pilots were killed in a combination of aerial combat, ground bombing, strafing, crashes, etc. A lot of them were buried over there. That's the funeral of Ed Lebo, the one I told you about, who was shot down. After the war, most of them were brought home. Just recently, they discovered a couple of more. So they're bringing home too. That's Ed Lebo, the second from the right. After he was killed in a dogfight, many years later, one of his family contacted me because they knew of my collection, and his wings in the upper left hand, and the upper portion of this, his ID card, his 2 patches, and his bullet. I have those today. The patches around my jacket and the wings, and I'll show you later. The bullet, Ed was one of those people or pilots who always believed that if he carried his bullet with him, nothing would happen. The day of his fatal encounter, he left everything behind. This is Red Hanks, or she married Ed P. Tosh there, or Emma P. Tosh. She died a few years ago. She was one of 2 nurses. At the end of their contract, they were getting ready to go home, and Chenault had asked a few of them if they would say, or he just put the word out if anybody wanted to stay on and help train the new people coming in. Well, Ed was packed, and Emma asked him, aren't you going to stay and help Chenault? His response was, I thought you wanted to come home. Anyway, he stayed at the end of his 2nd week. His last day of flying Friday, got shot down and killed. And she was pregnant at the time. Nice one. The P-40, very easy to maintain. Here it is by Chinese work people. And on the bottom one, you can see the Camco Central Aircraft Manufacturing Corporation, dummy company set up. This is the armored around the cockpit, 3/4 inch all around the cockpit. Armored piercing fuel tanks. And this is the maintenance board for the engines of the 3rd Pursuit Squadron. As I said, they didn't get any supplies, especially engines or engine parts, so the maintenance was one thing that they really kept up on the P-40s. Allison engine, liquid cooled. I'm sorry, the second one. I think the second one was air cooled. Anyway, this was the first one. It also powered the P-38, the P-39, the P-51 Mustang, the first one, and the P-40. Very reliable engine. Although this is an artist, this one took 17 hits and was still able to land. Oops. When the Japanese were bombing the fields, what the Americans did, they would try and hide them in the grasses, etc. Well, what the Chinese did, they built paper mache aircraft dummies. This is all bamboo and paper mache. Here's a, see? There's a squadron of them. And what the ABG would also do, the nose cones up here, they would change the color of them on a daily basis. They make believe there were more than they had. They never had, excuse me, they never had more than 80 aircraft at one time. And then they would change the numbers to 100, 120, etc. That was one of their tactics. Chennault had one favorable pastime, loved every free moment he got. This is the airfield in Toungoo that they shared with the British. The British also gave them uniform parts. Here's Chennault, his one favorite pastime. Every time they had a lull in operations or they had some dead time, it was baseball. Loved to play baseball. Loved to beat the British. Tex said the few times that the British beat the Americans, you couldn't talk to Chennault for a day, he was so upset. This is the #1 hostel. Over there, they didn't call them barracks, they called them hostels. This is the #1 hostel in Kunming, China. It's still there today, I've been in it. It's now a natural museum. It also housed the 2nd and 3rd squadrons. This is like in the middle of the city. It's all modern buildings around it. And this is right in the middle of the city. This is the entrance to the Green Park on the left-hand side. When I told you about there's no birds in China, I went there into the Green Park because I had some extra time. And in the Green Park are the old Chinese grandparents who watch the one child. They're in there doing their exercises. They're in there playing their musical instruments, their board games. And this is the only place I ever saw birds in China. And these are birds that usually escape from the houses, like canaries or parrots or etc. Apparently they knew where to go. And gigantic koi, gigantic goldfish in there too. Very, very peaceful place, believe me. And parts of right outside of the Green Park, it's not as bad as you see, but it looks like it's hundreds of years old. Favorite swimming hole? Favorite bathing suit? And their favorite bar, which is still there today, the Silver Cafe. And not in the same sense, but it's still in the same location, naturally upgraded. And there's the third squadron sitting here. So it's just like the movies. They go out, they fight, they come back, they clean, they shower, they eat, and they go to town for a drink. This is one of 7 bracelets that were presented to one of the mechanics of the Flying Tigers. They helped this particular nunnery and orphanage build it and keep it up. So they presented the 7 of them to the Flying Tigers. One of the families offered it to me many years ago, and I have it in my collection. And these are 30 caliber shells, hand-etched serpent and pagoda. And in the middle here it says Mother Mary. The Japanese would drop leaflets to the Chinese people telling them they're mercenaries. They are paid killers, that they have come, they're going to rape their women, they're going to steal their farm animals, kill them, etc., etc. It had no effect on the Chinese people because, as I said, once the Flying Tigers started bombing and flying against the Japanese, all Japanese bombing stopped. At the time, I have to realize this was right after Pearl Harbor, so the morale in the United States was extremely low. So they played up the exploits of the Flying Tigers. The Flying Tigers flew against the Japanese at a ratio of 15 to 1, which was unbelievable. You can see here 108 planes attacked by 3 Americans. The biggest battle was New Year's Eve, where they were attacked by 128 fighters and bombers. They shot down 26 of them with the loss of no ABG. There you go, more. There were also articles in Life magazine at the time. In the 7 months, they only fought for 7 months in aerial combat. In 7 months, they shot down 299 confirmed kills. Confirmed kill, it has to be witnessed by one or more, and another 157 probables, where nobody saw it crashed or died to the ground, but through the clouds. And that record has never been surpassed today. And this, don't forget, this is dogfighting, not firing a rocket 30 miles out. There's many more articles, mostly displayed by the New York Times. And at the time, the commentator who was on the radio, who was in charge of talking about their exploits and all their aerial action, was John Daly, if you remember him from What's My Line. Their last battle was the bridge at the Salween River Gorge, which separated eastern China into western China. The 5th Imperial, 2 divisions of the 5th Imperial Japanese Army were advancing, 19,000 troops, and a 20-mile column, armored column also. They reached the bridge, they were getting close to the bridge. This is the bridge. Chinese army blew the bridge, blew it up, stopped their advancement, no bridge. When the Japanese got to this bridge, along the road over here, they stopped, they started building pontoon bridges across. Tex Hill and the boys loaded their planes up with ammunition, with bombs, as many of a bomb load, much of a bomb load they could carry. Tex Hill was the first one to come in with a 500-pound bomb. There's another grouping back here. He came in and he dropped a 500-pound bomb up here on the ledge, which created a rock landslide and stopped them from building. The other guys went to the other end of the 20-mile column and did the same thing and boxed them in. For the next 4 days, they kept returning, and they literally destroyed 19,000 troops in armored columns. Very few could escape because of the high cliffs and the mountains. This is a Ford tri-motor bomb. They strap bombs all over, outside, at any place they could get them. Here's another one. British Lysander, which they borrowed from the British, and they destroyed that 5th Imperial 2 divisions. For that, they were awarded what we comparable to Medal of Honor to, and it was pinned on them personally by Madam Chiang Kai-shek. This is a White Cloud banner. There's 2 of those in my collection. The Flying Tigers created 26 aces, and aces shoot down 5 or more Japanese aircraft. This is, this is Neil. My brain freezes me. He was the highest scoring ace with 19 kills. R.T. Smith, 9 victories. This is R.T. Smith, and he has the White Cloud banner, and so does Chuck Older. Chuck Older, after they disbanded, they became the 23rd Fighter Group, 73rd, 4th, and 5th Squadrons, and then they were absorbed into the 14th Air Force, which was started over there, and Chenault headed that. But Chuck Older had 10.5 kills with the AVG and 8 more kills with the when he was became with the 23rd Fighter Group. You don't know the name Chuck Older. Chuck Older was a trial judge for the Charlie Manson trial. Here he is when he switched over to P-51 Mustangs.
What's a half a kill?
Half a kill. 2 of them shot him down. 2 of them shot one plane down.
Okay, half a prayer. Okay, thank you.
Some of them, one guy had quarter kill. 4 of them shot him. It must have been a bomb. But here's all his kills, Chuck Older. Of those who stayed on to help Chenault train those, and you see the tallest guy, he's over 7 foot, and the youngest one, and then you see where they painted over now, the 12-point star with the American star. This here, he came and headed the 23rd Fighter Group. He came and he flew with Chenault near the end to learn their tactics. This is Robert Scott. God is my co-pilot. There he is with his kills. Those of them today, or were yesterday, good-looking guys. Charlie Bond is still alive. Charlie Bond was shot down or bailed out or crash landed 3 times. You can see he's got burns on him. He stayed in the Air Force, hired a Chinese student to teach him fluent Chinese, and he retired from the Air Force as a 3-star general. Ken Jernstedt was a congressman in California for many, many years, 10.5 kills. He's still alive, fortunately totally blind. Another one, Charlie Mott, who was one of 3 who wound up in a Japanese POW camp early in 1941. So from 1941 to 1945, he was a POW. Dick Rossi headed the Flying Tiger Association. I met him many, many, many times. He passed away about 2 years ago. That was him 2 years ago. And over here, John Howard. John Howard, after he left the ABG, he stayed in the Army Air Corps, became a pilot in the European theater, became a Medal of Honor winner when a group of B-17s were attacked by German Messerschmitt aircraft, and he shot down 5 of them at one time. They were, and the rest of them went home. For that, he was awarded the Medal of Honor. This is one of the Japanese transports coming into Kunming, China. In that theater of war, they had a surrender. The white stripe on the tail tells American flyers, don't shoot it down. It's a Japanese surrender aircraft. This is Chennault's farewell banquet in Kunming, China. Tex told us that after the banquet, Chennault was headed to the airport 2.5 miles away, and almost 1 million Chinese people turned out, and they pushed his car to the airport. They shut off the engine, and the Chinese people pushed it in tribute to him. This is Anna Chennault. This is 1957. He died in 1958. Very, very heavy smoker. If you remember, he did a lot of commercials for Camel cigarettes. Those were nails in your coffin. And I met Anna a few times. And there's the Curtiss Wright Corporation factory in Buffalo, New York. As I said, they built about 14,000 of them, price of $55,000. There's very, very rare aircraft. There's only maybe a dozen of them flying in the world today. There's only one around here, and that's at Farmingdale, Long Island, at the Republic Museum. There's one for sale now, about $1.4 million. My wife will let me buy it. That's it from Farmingdale. That's the end model, 2-seater. That's what happened to most World War II aircraft after the war, scrap. Today, top dollar, all of them. 5 of the original Flying Tigers started Flying Tiger Airlines, which flew anything, anywhere in the world. I'm a retired FedEx flight manager. In 1959, FedEx acquired Flying Tiger Airline mainly for the routes. And with that came over 900 crew members, many of them going back to those days. And many of them brought me memorabilia. FedEx was kind enough to let me display a lot of my collection to their conference rooms at Bradley Airport. Tale of a Tiger by R.T. Smith. He kept a diary from day one for the entire 1-year contract. He wrote in it every day. That is in my collection. Family offered it to me. Very, very interesting reading. I read it many times. He never swears in it at all, never curses or anything. Closest he came to it when, do you remember when the 3rd Jing Bao ball went up, pilots were running to their aircraft with their parachutes on, and that was at Tunggu, Burma, the British. And he said, we get in our aircraft and we turn around and there's the goddamn British still have to finish drinking their tea.
No.
This is part of my collection. I have a Wing 50 caliber machine gun. This John Wayne, got him too. There's different videos and CDs out on them. The best one is the one you see on the History Channel, Fei Hu. Fei Hu is Chinese Flying Tigers. That's the best one. Here they are, just like kids of today, going off to war, become one of the most famous fighter groups of all times. And the saddest part about this whole presentation, at the surrender of Japan on the USS Missouri, MacArthur turned around to his aide and says, "Where's Chenault?" And nobody had ever invited Chenault to the signing of the surrender of Japan. And that's it, folks. You enjoyed it.
Do you have questions for Don?
Yes.
How many flights in total do they do, the Tigers? I mean, do they go out like once a day or standard?
They only
Is there-
flew when the Japanese were coming.
so just-
For the most part, they did attack, or they do a strategic bridge or a supply train or something like that. But for the most part, they didn't fly. This is one of the original silk blood chips. Very rare. Been offered $12,000 of little pieces. Very rare. If you were lucky to get, then number two, if you were lucky to get between 0 and 350, I don't even know what they would be worth. This is the original patches that were on Ed Lee Bolt's jacket when he was shot down. This one, and his flying wings. This is an original jacket. I had this painted on by one of the aviation honors and assigned by some of the original Flying Tigers. When I was over in China, one of the trips, I took 6 into China flights, and they upgraded me on 3 of them. Yeah, I said, I'm not a Flying Tiger, not at all. I said, no, we don't care, we don't care, we don't care. And even we went to some museum, I forgot where it was. But anyway, every Japanese person, older Japanese person, recognized it on Chenault. We went to this one site next to the old Burma Road. It's supposed to be one of the most revered sites in the Chinese-Japanese War, where the Chinese lost 33,000 troops, and the Japanese lost 13,000 troops. The Chinese won the battle, but they lost the most. And it was in a place where you look across a ravine in the valley, and supposedly at night they hear the echoes of it. Hundreds of, I'm getting ahead of myself. When the Japanese had that particular territory, they took all the relics and gold and everything from the Chinese people, and we put them in this cave that they had the Chinese people build. Then they killed all the Chinese people and sealed the cave. Well, they say at night you could hear the ghost of the Chinese people who were killed. It's just very revered. Nobody comes here, Well, 2 minutes later, here come 2 tour buses full of Japanese people. And they go, we know that they know where the cave is, because they still can't find the entrance. But it was, as I said, it was quite an experience. I totally different respect for the Chinese people that I went to China. Yes.
Why didn't they manage to get any bombers into those fields? Because they had protection in P-40s. Could they just not get B-17s in that area?
No, went to Germany first. They got into some of them were destroyed at Pearl, some of them weren't, but they all went to the European theater of war at the time. And Chanel couldn't convince them. It's just, that's the way it was.
These are not flying models.
No. They're not flying models.
Well, where's the one that you built that you flew?
I didn't build any that I flew.
Oh, I thought you were the guy who flew models as well.
No, I built them.
Oh,
No. You mean the wooden ones, the old balsa wood? That's long arm. Yeah. Yes, ma'am.
Does the Burma Road still exist?
Parts of it only.
Parts of it?
Yeah, there's like a new 2-lane highway.
And did the Americans send supplies by ship to Rangoon,
Yes.
and then they put them on vehicles and took them back way into China?
They're coming,
Yeah.
yeah, so it was 700 miles. That was a supply route. Later on, when the 14th Air Force was started, then they started flying a hump, which they called it the Himalayas Mountains, which is the largest aircraft cemetery in the world to this day, the Himalaya Mountains. Of all the aircraft that
Americans were flying overhead, they thought,
Drones, they would see them.
they would see them and think that they had all these pieces of equipment that they would make, you know.
Yeah, I don't doubt it. I mean, it's,
So, yes, this has been done many times.
yeah, I guess the Chinese and the Burmese did that over
That
too.
was years ago.
I mean, we did it, the British did it with blow up tanks and everything. I mean, tanks that they blew up with air, dummy tanks. Some of the stuff you can research it, even in California, covering cities where they built aircraft and everything, because we thought Japanese were going to invade us and everything. There's a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff. Yes.
Have you read any Japanese accounts,
Why do you
books,
say that?
of the effect that the Flying Tigers had on their lands?
One of the books back there, probably the most informative, is by a guy named Ford. And in it, he interviewed a lot of Japanese pilots, and he disputes the number of aircraft shot down by the ABG. And the Flying Tiger Association today don't like Mr. Ford. But some of the Japanese pilots that were interviewed, and I read excerpts from them, they believe the same because they were never told that they were being defeated. And to this day, they say it's Iran. In Japan, only recently did they start putting in about the atrocities the Japanese committed about World War II. Only recently did they put anything in about World War II, whereas in Germany, every textbook has to talk about atrocities committed by Hitler. So the culture is totally different, but the Japanese is still, you know, Bushido Code of honor and all this other stuff. It's amazing.
How do you think that this stepped up the Japanese attack at Pearl Harbor when they realized that these were truly Americans that were beginning to fly for the Chinese?
Well, it was Yamamoto who said, you know, you're going to wake up a sleeping giant if you do it. And that's exactly what happened. Unfortunately, they didn't hit the other key targets in Pearl. Storage tanks. The good thing all the carriers were out before too. So,
Is this a hobby you carry over from your childhood?
yeah, it's my hobby. I'm retired FedEx flight manager. I don't work anymore. All my work now is with veterans. I do all work with veterans. My son was an Army Ranger in Iraq, 3 tours. Got 3 Humvees going on the